Herb. Herb is a plant. I mean, herbs are good for everything. Herb.
Welcome to Eugene Cannabis TV. Here we are, just coming in summer, and we're at the studios behind the Sheldon High School at the Community CTV-29 studios. And we got our friend Eric this evening, social commentator and a consultant. Tell me about your business a little bit, real quick. What is it?
Absolutely, yes. It's called medicinalhorizons.com, and basically I just help people who are either new to medical marijuana or they're considering medical marijuana. I even help families, family members who are trying to convince a loved one to use medical marijuana. And I really don't get people try to use it. I just get them to understand it. If they want to use it after that, you know, that's up to them. I believe they can benefit from it. So my goal is just to basically answer questions, help them understand the process, and then if they choose to use it, I help them go from there.
That's great. A lot of people have information. I've met a lot of older people that never thought they'd ever have anything to do with marijuana. They come up with a malady somewhere along the line, they heard about marijuana, they try it, and now they're convinced and they realize how it helps them, but now they don't know how to grow it, where to get it, and they're kind of uneasy about it, so that would be a great service.
You know, and you're right, a lot of people that I help, actually most of the people I help, have either never used, never thought they would ever use, and now that they find themselves in a position, and most of the people I help, by the time they reach me, you know, they're tired of going through the prescription drugs, they've failed them, they show now the prescription drugs are starting to work against them, and slowly but surely, you know, as especially the baby boomers, you know, we keep hearing this with the baby boomers and marijuana, you know, well, yeah, they were the ones who did use it when they were younger, and they didn't have children with 3 heads, and they didn't grow up to become drug dealers. It was a harmless drug that they used. Now that they're older, they're realizing, you know, this is a definite option, and a lot of people are finding out that it's the best option in most circumstances.
Yeah, that's great service. That's great. Well, we got your information on our screen, and also you can get a hold of dankbagman@hotmail.com if you ever need any info on anything that's on the show. We want to talk about our friends on the greener side, the very unjust bust that happened. And by the way, they haven't been charged yet. That's one of the tactics they use is they do, a lot of times they seem to do these busts just out of harassment. They'll bust a business, tear up stuff, steal. I call it steal because they're taking a lot of permission, but of course legally, I guess it's legal theft. Yeah. But anyway, they steal stuff, and luckily not in this case. It didn't seem to do through the trashing thing like they seem to like to do. But regardless, they had an article. Jack Moran, the Registered Guard, came out with a second article on this case, published in the Registered Guard on the 13th of June. Generally, Jack Moran, I feel, writes a pretty good story and pretty honest. But some of the things that are mentioned in here, we only surmise that he used information that he was given, but there's some facts that aren't quite as they are. So we can't be real a lot of detail on this because it is an ongoing case. But I think the thing we found the most appalling is the fact they used an informant. And what's the motivation of an informant, you know? And also how low can a person be to be an informant, especially this one. I'm trying to remember, I didn't mark it where they talked about.
Well, yeah, you know, another thing too, Dan, is that just the use of an informant. This was a medical marijuana resource center that had working hours. Now, I don't know too many drug dealers that have office hours or business hours. But this medical marijuana resource center was open from Monday through Saturday, 10 to 5, 11 to 5 on Saturday. Law enforcement could have simply walked in the door. I mean, they had an open sign. They could have walked right in. Actually, the day that they finally decided to come and execute the raid, the door was open. They walked right in. The use of the informant is actually kind of comical in the sense that it was almost as if they were practicing for whenever they decided to get the courage to go after the real criminals. So I guess in some regard they do need practice in deploying an informant in the event that, like I said, they ever get the courage to go after real criminals. But just the fact that they had to even use an informant. And I can tell you, because I was a patient who used the greener side, it wouldn't have taken one trip for them to go in there. There's nothing they'd do differently from any time, and they would have gladly let them walk in and told them exactly what they did. So when you see this, it kind of, well, it makes it look really cool in the newspapers. The story sounds really crazy. It's like, we've all seen movies. I've seen, Blow, and I've seen all the cool drug movies, and there's always this informant who goes undercover, and this is just a joke. I mean, this is them trying to justify their thuggish ways. And like Dan was saying, the informant, I mean, just read off some of the things that this informant was.
Police have long used undercover informants to help compile evidence in drug cases. The informant, who worked with detectives in the greener side investigation, previously had been implicated in cases involving meth delivery, assault, and child neglect, according to the affidavit. My question I have is how did he get his card? I mean, is he a regular card holder? Did he get a card to do this bust, or did he already have a card? And why is he turning against other patients?
And that's what people need to understand. So in case people know how it works, an informant is offered either a deal, money, reduced sentence for him to go and convict other people. Now, in this case, when you see this person's a methamphetamine delivery, I would think the first thing they'd use this guy for is to go bust who we got meth from. But actually, they got a guy who was busted for methamphetamine delivery, assault, and child neglect. They went to that person and said, how would you like your sentence reduced or completely disappeared if you can help us bust medical marijuana patients? So they essentially let a guy out, or paid him, or reduced his sentence. It wasn't for nothing. You got to understand this. So they could go and bust medical marijuana. Now, when people ask me, well, why would they bother wasting their time? Well, when they bust these medical marijuana centers, they get to treat them as if this was Scarface. So let's imagine Scarface lived in Lane County and he had a mansion and it was full of fancy cars and money. Well, they go in there and they bust Scarface. They get to keep all that money. They get to keep all those cars. Well, they get to do the same thing to the greener side, to Cannabism, to all these other clubs, whether they're in Eugene, Southern Oregon. That's the only purpose of these raids. Now, they keep trying to say that they're not going to bust anybody who is using medical marijuana. No, they're just going to bust the people who are trying to help them. And when they're going to let a guy with methamphetamine, child neglect, and assault, I said this in the last time I was on the air, our law enforcement in this county has made it clear to the public that serious crimes are not on their agenda. It's just not. I've contended, and this is my own personal belief, that the drug enforcement agencies of this area don't have the guts to go after the real criminals. I mean, let's be honest. Real criminals have guns, and they're scary. They shoot back. They walked into the greener side, 2 women, door open, come on in, here you go. That's who our real law enforcement is. And you know what? I'm so glad that the city fee didn't pass. I don't live in Eugene, unfortunately. I live on the outskirts, and the county one passed. I voted against that one as well. But at least the people in Eugene were wise enough to know that this is the kind of stuff that they're blowing money on. They're going to let a guy go with child neglect, assault, and meth delivery. So medical marijuana patients can't get their medicine. Good job, Lane County. Way to go.
Yeah, so we'll be hearing more from that case, and you'll be hearing more from us about it. There'll be fundraisers coming up. We'll be talking about that as they develop. And we have good news too now. Actually, the Oregon governor signed SB 281 allowing PTSD sufferers to use cannabis. Now that's great, but there's one little thing in here that caught my eye though, because the first sentence, it says, as of January 1, 2014, veterans and others with PTSD will be able to get their OMMP cards. But they don't. This really infuriates me, because when our enemies try to enact some kind of legislation that's been detrimental to the OMP in the past, they have always put a clause in there to where it's an emergency. It's called, I forget the exact name for it, but they call it an emergency clause, so that as soon as it's passed, it goes into effect immediately because we have an emergency problem. They've done that over and over again, trying to tear down the program, but here we have something to help patients. They finally, after we went through the system twice trying to get it approved and they ignored us, finally we went through the legislature, and actually surprised me more that they actually got it through, got it passed, and the governor signed it, but we got to wait till January 1st. They couldn't make it an emergency. You know?
Yeah, there's definitely...
No big deal, wait till January, you can wait a little longer. But anyway, so good news and bad news there, I guess. But at least Kitzhofer had the guts to sign it this time. If you remember back in I think it was 97, where he signed when the legislature recriminalized possession of less than an ounce,
Yep.
and the governor all along said he was going to veto it, and when it actually came to his desk, he reluctantly signed it. I will never forgive him for that. So anyway, this time he stumbled around and got it right. So let's hope that he keeps that trend up. So
absolutely, and it's about time too. This is
definitely.
And for people that don't understand that this also, while a lot of veterans were in mind with the passage of this bill, PTSD doesn't just affect people who have served in the military. It has a lot to do with people who are survivors of accidents, people who survive traumatic, abusive relationships, survivor's guilt sometimes. There's just so many spectrums. And the main thing is, and this is one of the, through my consulting, I've helped a lot of veterans. And one of the main things too is marijuana and cannabis helps alleviate some of these. You should see some of the medications that they use to treat PTSD. Some of these things are very, very heavy. And so a lot of this will help people. And I've seen people take themselves off of these medications, and some people I've seen them help them manage the ones they got to take. But this is definitely a huge step, and I hope that more are to come.
You bet. We're going to talk a bit more about this on the next next half. So stick around and come back. I've got a really cool story from the East Coast, the right coast, we're the left coast.
Shelly Fox Loken is a speaker for Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, which is an organization that started up in the early 2000s. It's comprised of former criminal justice professionals, DEA, judges, cops, corrections, border, you name it, they're in there. And it's a great group. I really encourage you to support this organization. And here's Shelly Fox Loken.
Thank you. Well, you just took the first paragraph of my prepared speech, explaining what Law Enforcement Against Prohibition is. I'm sorry. Okay. Anyway, I wanted to thank everyone for coming. It's a beautiful day to pre-celebrate our nearing victory in making marijuana legal for adults in Oregon and nationwide. I represent the organization of LEAP, which has more than 80,000 supporters, which more than 5,000 of whom have law enforcement experience from around the world. Our group consists of police officers, judges, prosecutors, prison officials, and supporters who know that the time has come to end this atrocious war on American citizens who use marijuana. I'm a retired parole and probation officer and prison counselor. When I first began working as a PO here in this wonderful, vibrant city of Eugene in 1985, the drug war was just entering high gear. At that time, POs were not seen as an extension of the police departments as they are now. Instead, we were primarily counselors who attempted to help criminals find ways to stop committing crimes. The problem was, drug offenders really were not criminals, at least to start with. They learned criminality in order to survive in a world that refused to allow them what they needed, wanted, or craved. I spent way too much time trying to convince these otherwise non-criminals that they were indeed criminals. What would cure their criminality? Legalize drugs. I don't know how many times I arrested people and took them to jail for using illegal drugs, but I know it was way too many. Any is too many. Jail is not a treatment program. Prison does not fix medical problems or cure addiction. Jail and prison do not even guarantee that people don't have access to drugs and alcohol. Jail and prison for any drug users does nothing to keep any of us safer, and it exacerbates the problems people are self-medicating for. And worst of all, prison destroys lives. Not just the person who goes to prison either. It adversely impacts the spouses, children, extended family, and even employers. It often destroys the very ties that keep people productive and happy. And after we've taken away everything, we dump them back out and demand that they behave and comply with conditions that any of us would be challenged to do. Sound like a setup for failure? It was, and it is. And this approach will always fail. When I and others in law enforcement went into this profession, it was with the intent to help others. After a few years of locking up drug offenders, watching civil rights and liberties be eroded, watching police and corrections officers become corrupt or unethical, and seeing the destruction of too many lives, I realized that this was not what I had signed up for. So I left. And now I can try to make my amends by doing what I can to see that these unjust and harmful laws are repealed and replaced with sensible regulation. The war on drugs has failed. There is no one anywhere who can claim otherwise, and no one even tries to. The war on marijuana users, though, is about to be won by us. We are succeeding because the public can no longer be lied to, manipulated, and driven into a frenzy of fear by those whose motives can only be suspect. The public has discovered that marijuana users are not bad, scary people, despite all the propaganda. The public knows marijuana users. Their fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, doctors, lawyers, plumbers, car mechanics, food servers, etc. Marijuana users are everywhere, and everyone knows someone who uses it responsibly. The lie has been outed, thanks to people like you. I want to close with a story about my first time working at Oregon State Penitentiary in 1980 as a correctional officer. I was a guard on a tower, and it was yard time. A small group of 4 to 5 inmates sat on the grass under my tower and started smoking a joint together. Being new and green, I flipped out, and I called for yard officers to come take them away to segregation. I was very surprised that the officers sauntered slowly towards the group, talking loudly, making sure the inmates knew they were coming. The inmates continued smoking the joint until the officers were a few feet away, then put it out with one swallowing the roach. The officers broke up the group and did nothing about their defiance of the rules. When I asked the sergeant in charge of the yard about it later, he told me that the warden, Hoyt Cup, had an unofficial policy of ignoring marijuana used by inmates. Reportedly, he felt they were much easier to deal with when high on weed as opposed to the violent and life-threatening results of inmates consuming homemade alcohol. He was a man ahead of his times. Thank you. Enjoy the celebration. Keep up the good work as the war isn't quite over yet, so keep fighting for what's right.
We're back, just like a bad debt. The second segment of the Eugene Cannabis TV episode. We've got a good friend Eric here beside us, and DanK or Dan. I'll either one. Call me either one. Call me anything but late for din. I'm going to quickly run over this little article I came across. The ASA, which is the Americans for Safe Access, excellent organization of marijuana advocates, medical marijuana advocates. They have a report that finds that Obama has already outspent Bush by $100 million. According to our friends, it says the Department of Justice has already spent nearly $500 million fighting medical cannabis. Did you know that the Obama administration spent over half of that money on medical cannabis investigations, paramilitary-style raids, prosecutions, incarceration, and civil asset forfeiture lawsuits? Most Americans do not know these things, but what is worse is that most members of Congress don't know that either. And that's so they lead off and they're asking for a donation. But that's a great organization, AmericansForSafeAccess.org. I recommend it highly, great group.
And you know, some of that money was spent here in Lane County since our own INET team is funded by the DEA. And so, a lot of people don't understand that when Obama first tried to get elected, he had mentioned that he wouldn't make marijuana a priority. And then he turned around and made it his biggest priority, especially when it came to drug enforcement. This is indicative of all politicians. You know, some people say, oh, this Democrat lied. This is how they all get elected, and people need to start paying attention to these things. But yeah, this is, people weren't aware of that, but actually Obama has been one of the worst presidents in regards to drug policy since Nixon. And a lot of people were probably not too aware of that, but that's I'm glad that the ASA has brought that out to people's attention.
Right, and Clinton wasn't all that great either.
Correct, exactly.
So yeah, it's quite disgusting. It's one of those things I always like to refer to as it's like the bumper sticker. If you're not outraged, you're not paying attention.
Absolutely.
But on the good side, this is the story that I really enjoyed bringing up. New Hampshire jury nullifies its first felony marijuana case. It says here, this is in Barstead, New Hampshire. This story comes from us from the prweb.com. Doug Darrell beat the odds and walked home from his trial as a free man on Friday, a major win for the state's new jury nullification law. Facing felony drug cultivation charges for growing marijuana plants behind his house, the 59-year-old Rastafarian saw all of the charges against him dropped after jurors in his trial successfully convinced their peers to nullify the case on the grounds that Darrell was simply trying to obey the customs of his religion. Many of us wondered what kind of precedent this would set, said juror and SFP participant Kathleen Converse in an exclusive interview with Free Talk Live. But after chewing on all the possibilities and rereading the definition of a nullification, we all decided that the only fair thing to do was to vote with our consciences and acquit the defendant of all charges. And that's one of the things about this nullification deal. The juror actually, nobody can tell you how to vote. And so that vote is completely up to you, and you have the freedom and the power to go any way you want with it. And that's where nullification actually starts. And then if you can convince other members of the jury the same thing. But there was a story, I wish I had it in front of me, but a couple of years ago, a 90-some-year-old gentleman was handing out literature promoting jury nullification around the courthouse. He was charged with trespassing. He fought the charges, and he won. And that was another big case.
Yeah, you know, what jury, people need to know what jury nullification is. It's simply, if you find yourself on a jury, and they're asking you to convict somebody of a law you feel is ridiculous or is a waste of time, or how I personally feel, if I'm being asked to convict somebody, send them away to prison, which in no way is going to make my community safer, I'm going to say no. And that's exactly what these people did. They're looking at this case and they're asking to try this gentleman as a felon. And when this jury looked at all the things, said, I can't consciously justify treating this person as a felon for growing a plant. One of the arguments people say is, well, jury nullification, sometimes it can backfire. Sometimes, you know, the judge can overrule. And like I've said in past, episodes, judges get reelected. And this is where the people, you know, they say get out and vote. It's not just simply on, you know, voting for a president or voting for some initiative. You know, every time I go, I vote on almost everything that comes to me, and I look at it. And all the time, a lot of these judges don't have anybody running against them. It's just them to be reelected. And these are the times that you can send a message. If all these people are going to waste our time, from, you know, the district attorney on down to the law enforcement to even the judges, then it's us. People think that, oh, we've lost power. No, we definitely still have some power left. You just have to choose and know how to use it and when to wield it. And in this instance, the jury showed that, yes, the people still have power, and this is how they did it. Fortunately, you know, this worked out for the gentleman, and he never should have even been facing felony charges. No one should be for marijuana. And that's been one of the biggest cons of all time, is that this is a dangerous substance, and its use and its cultivation poses a danger to our society. And then they like to scare you really bad and say it's gonna, you know, your children are gonna grow up and they're gonna have problems and it's gonna be dangerous and blah, blah, blah. Well, this has just made my day when I read this, Dan.
Yeah,
you know, just to see that a jury
yeah,
smart enough had the courage to do what in their hearts was right. And I can tell you there's probably been many juries where they had their hearts, you know, knowing that this person probably shouldn't go to jail, but they felt confined that, well, the law says this. Mm-hmm. The law also says you could choose whatever you wish to choose in terms of a verdict.
Yeah, and again, it's in New Hampshire. It's a groundbreaking win for the participants of the Free State Project who helped get HB 146 signed into law. As an organization, the Free State Project does not back any political candidates nor specific legislation. Founded in 2001 with the intent to attract 20,000 liberty-loving individuals to New Hampshire in order to restore the constitutional principles of personal responsibility and freedom, members of the Free State Project have quickly grown into the most significantly liberty-based activist group in the country. So thanks to them and congratulations on all that.
You know, and also real quick, before we move on to another story, the reason why we bring this up, why does this, you know, story in New Hampshire have to deal with Oregon? Well, there's going to be some cases coming up here in Oregon, whether it's in Medford and Eugene. You know, if people are watching this up in, you know, Portland or wherever you get the chance to see this, or if you're watching this in another state, if you find yourself on the jury on a marijuana case, it's real simple. You know, if you think that this is a waste of money and a waste of resources, and if you think that putting somebody in jail for marijuana is better than putting in, you know, child pornographers, methamphetamine users, people who commit assault, then that's your duty. It is your duty to not convict these people and send a message to law enforcement. Quit wasting our money and our resources and start making our communities safer. And fortunately for this community in New Hampshire, their jury told their law enforcement, make our communities safer, quit wasting our money, quit wasting our time, and get out there and do the job you're supposed to do.
Definitely, that's right. So yeah, it's definitely moving in the right direction. And speaking of the moving in the right direction, Paul Stanford, the Hemp and Cannabis Foundation owner and also Hemp News, has filed 2 new initiatives. One of the measures is similar to the 2012 initiative that fell short by just 6 points at the polls, but with a couple of major changes, reports Jeff Mapes at the Oregonian. The commission would no longer be chosen by cannabis growers, retailers, and others in the marijuana community, but instead it would be appointed by the governor, according to Stanford. See, the other major change from Measure 80, which would have allowed adults to possess unlimited quantities of marijuana, is that the new proposal would impose limits of 24 plants and 24 ounces of dried marijuana. Stanford's second proposed initiative would constitutionally allow those 21 and older to possess and grow cannabis. It would allow the state to reasonably define, limit, and regulate marijuana. Stanford said he is working on a broad coalition of cannabis activists and will go ahead with whichever of the 2 legalization measures they decide has the best chance of passage. So I actually have the initiatives. You can get a hold of DanK Bagman at hotmail.com, and I talk to you about it if you're going to get those signed. We're gathering 1,000 qualified bona fide signatures, and then that will start the actual signature process. So it's phase 1 right now.
Correct.
So anyway, that's going on there, and the Emerald Empire Hemp Fest plans are ramping up, and it's going to be an exciting year with the elections they were last year. It's going to really take off this year. So stay tuned and go to the website, emeraldempirehempfest.com.
And check out all the names and all the websites you see coming across the screen. You know, it's all of our friends and allies in this fight. So, you know, please do us a favor and stop by, check those people out, stop by the Hemp Fest, and support all your local cannabis reform organizations.